record on this computer. Perfect. I'll make sure to make this available on our website shortly. I know almost everyone on the line, but for formality's sake, I'm Katie Hepner, Director of the Economic Alliance, co-hosting these coffee talks along with Dean Uzelman and the Wadena Development Authority. Happy to have you all join us today. And also remember to mute yourself if you're not speaking. All of you look mute, but always need that reminder. I'm really excited about today's guest speaker. Joining us, we have Kelly Ash. Is that how you pronounce your last name, Kelly? Kelly Ash from the Center for Rural Policy and Development. Kelly wrote a paper entitled Amazon Effect and Rural Tax Revenue. I think that that's just a really interesting concept, as we all probably did a lot more online ordering during COVID and maybe moving forward. Maybe I'm feeling a little guilty this morning about the Amazon package that's currently sitting on my front porch that I need to grab. So, but really interesting to think about how that online ordering affects our local taxes. So without further ado, Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, yeah, thanks everybody. Pleasure to be here. I'm going to do a real quick introduction into the Center for Rural Policy and Development in case you haven't heard of it, and then we'll launch into the presentation. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes. So we'll move forward here. If you haven't heard of the Center for Rural Policy and Development, we were actually created by the Minnesota State Legislature back in the late 90s, like right around 1997, 1998, with the idea being that there would be an organization that is able to kind of put some concrete research, academic research, or gather academic research as well as data to kind of help provide some context into any sort of policies or issues that the legislature was talking about. We're nonpartisan, we're a nonprofit, and we really are just an objective organization meant to compile information for legislators and other rural leaders across the state in Minnesota. We're a small staff. There's 3 of us actually. So we're covering all of rural Minnesota. Like I said, I'm Kelly Ash. We are a virtual office. We don't have a building that we check into. So we all work from our homes. I live and work out of New London, Minnesota in Kandiyohi County, just north of Willmar. I'm also a city council member here. Marnie Werner is Vice President of Research and Operations. She's out of Mankato. Our director is Julie Tesh, and she's down in Waldorf, Minnesota on her family farm, but that's right by Waseca, if you haven't heard of Waldorf. And then for the year, we did hire a contract researcher to kind of help us out this year, Whitney Oakes, who just graduated from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and she's out of St. Paul. And we keep trying to push her to rural Minnesota. We take a lot of pride in working and living. We always say for rural Minnesota by rural Minnesota. So we have released just recently 3 reports. We're going to be talking a little bit about the middle one here, Amazon Effect and Rural Tax Revenues. Last month, we did Shifting Energy Infrastructure in rural Minnesota. That was really trying to grapple with why some of our rural utilities, or I should say energy utilities, struggle that serve rural areas struggle to kind of take on more kind of green energy or take on more types of renewable energy sources and what some of the policy and financial implications are of that. And then last summer, we did an immigrants, refugees, and local government outreach in rural Minnesota, which was kind of taking a look at how counties, some of the barriers they're facing and some of the challenges in trying to communicate and engage immigrants and refugees, particularly around the pandemic. Upcoming, so this week, we're actually going to be releasing county reliance on property taxes from ag land. This is particularly interesting for western and southern Minnesota. Ag land values have just gone through the roof, even though the farm economy itself hasn't been booming since 2013, really. So we actually have counties in rural Minnesota where nearly 1/3 to 50% of their total revenues comes from ag land value. And so we're going to have a paper kind of talking about what are the implications of that. Doing one on ruralness and challenges for EMS agencies. That's going to be probably next month sometime. We did an environmental scan of solutions in childcare. That report is currently being written as well. We sent out a survey, gathered the results, and they're writing that report now. Impacts of career and technical education has on high school migration patterns. That's going to be a couple months out. That's my next project after EMS. Rising property tax petitions in rural Minnesota, that's around the dark store theory stuff, and then the role of lower property taxes on housing churn. So that's some of the stuff we got coming out. If you're interested, you can check out our website. We have a YouTube channel. We actually have little 5-minute research overviews that are really kind of fun if you're looking for not a presentation or you don't want to read the stupid long reports. Go to our YouTube channel. We do have some videos for you. And then we also have a podcast, Center of Everywhere. You can check it out on Spotify, iTunes, and our website. So, all right, let's get into the content here. 5 sections, and these are very quick sections, so don't get too nervous. We're going to be talking about what is the Amazon effect, why rural leaders are concerned, the impact it has on local option sales taxes, the impact on property taxes, and then a few things to consider. And again, a lot of the stuff to consider is more for state legislators regarding policy. So just so we're all on the same page, what we mean by Amazon effect is not just Amazon, right? So the Amazon effect is this generic label used to sum up the powerful disruption e-commerce has caused in the retail economy over the last 20 years. And a lot of kind of academic research points to 3 different disruptions. So the first one is price flexibility and uniform pricing. So this is interesting. Price flexibility, you guys have probably noticed, particularly around inflation in today's market, prices change quickly now. It's not like where things had to kind of cycle through the market. Now with everybody so connected and having such great information so quickly, they adjust prices by the hour. You'll notice Amazon, they do it every 5 minutes, they'll update prices on things. It's crazy. And so a lot of brick and mortar retail have had to implement systems to do the same. And then there's this piece about uniform pricing. It used to be that, shopping for the best deal used to be a thing. And that really isn't anymore because for the most part, the uniform price, everybody's kind of on the same pricing. And this has been led by people, walking into a store being like, hey, I really like this product. I got to play with it a little bit. I'm going to look online to see if I can get it cheaper. And so that's really forced brick and mortar retail to kind of figure out how to kind of make it the same across the board. So you're not seeing major differences in terms of pricing. The rise of experience-based shopping. This is pretty self-explanatory. A lot of brick and mortar retail are trying to find ways to get people from behind their computers into their stores. And so there's a lot more investment in events and special things going on in the store that you can only get or you can only have access to if you're there in person. And then the incorporation of technology in brick and mortar retailers. You really saw this during the pandemic. Essentially, it's a lot of the brick and mortar retailers trying to make the shopping experience as easy and seamless as it is for somebody that's shopping online. That's really why you're seeing a lot of this kind of self-checkout lanes now and all this kind of digital content that's integrating into your experience. So what this has equal, these main 3 disruptions, is that brick and mortar retailers have had to make significant investments into their institutions, while at the same time, less profit is being made. And so that's really kind of what we're seeing, and it's different, but it's not that far different than 20 years ago when we were talking about the Walmart effect. And before that, it was the Kmart effect, right? Like we've had multiple effects. And, just to be real honest, anybody in retail, I have the utmost respect for because you are in a roller coaster of a market compared to any other industry that exists in the United States. Retail is a crazy roller coaster. So why are rural leaders concerned about this? So the shift is happening in Minnesota. Unfortunately, the Minnesota Department of Revenue, there's a couple issues here. We don't have a great way to track just online sales. And so what we're doing here, these 2 lines, we have Minnesota retail taxable sales, and that's an index from 2010. How much has it changed over the years? And then non-Minnesota retail. Now, this does get into folks that maybe order something in a catalog or whatever and have it shipped to them, right? You're ordering from outstate of Minnesota, but that's such a small percentage. Most of the non-Minnesota retail is e-commerce to an extent. So it's the best we can do with the Department of Revenue data that is collected. But as you can see, Minnesota retail, so that's more like brick and mortar, increased by 32% in taxable sales since 2010, where for the more non-Minnesota retail, which is more the e-commerce stuff, 171% increase. And we're not totally certain what this is. Not even the Department of Revenue knows why. There might be a data glitch. They're working on that, but something's going on there. So what this has meant then, as far as the total share of taxable sales as a percent of total sales in Minnesota, means that e-commerce is right around that 13% of total sales. Now, I think a lot of folks, when they first see that, they're like, oh, I would have expected that to be like 40 or 50%. It's like, well, you have to understand, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars at 13.2% of all taxable sales. Taxable sales is in the billions. And so 13.2% is a huge chunk. And that's a pretty steep curve for any sort of trend that we would see in the market. Usually things are a little bit flatter, a little bit more gradual. This is not, this is steep. So for a lot of rural leaders, there's really two tax revenue sources that can be impacted by this. The first is the local option sales tax. We'll talk about that first. And then the second is the commercial property taxes. And we'll talk about that second. So let's talk about the local option sales tax, section 3 here. I just pulled out some communities. So what we wanted to do was look at local option sales tax revenue since implementation. Are we seeing anything that's just like, whoa, you know, things are flat, they're not growing, or things are in decline? And this is just a random sample. We did a modeling on the full data set to kind of look, but we didn't see anything. What we're seeing here is just like, yeah, pretty consistent growth for the most part. You're going to see some odd things. And actually, this is a new chart. I didn't include this in the report. I included the 2020 data, which just came out not that long ago. Super interesting. I think a lot of us expected revenues to like decline significantly in 2020. In rural Minnesota or outside of the 7-county metro, that did not happen. Not at all. And in fact, we saw some pretty significant increases in 2020, which is really, really interesting. But where you saw the decline was the 7-county Minneapolis, St. Paul. This is St. Paul right here. They took a pretty big cliff dive in 2020. Whoops, sorry. And Minneapolis did the same, just because you lost all like the Timberwolves games, the football games, all these events that didn't happen. They get huge, huge, huge tax revenue from that. And so not having those impacted them the most, where in most of rural Minnesota, we actually did pretty good. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. I did pull out some counties here. I did have Wadena. County transportation tax, or the local option sales taxes for counties that are linked to transportation projects, have really been in implementation since 2014. So these aren't great trend lines. They're not going to show us a lot, but I did want to include it to kind of show like, yeah, this is, you know, we're not seeing anything at the county level either. And in Wadena, for the most part, it's right in line with everybody else right there at 31% since 2015, which I think is when Wadena implemented it. Might have been halfway through 2014. I can't remember. So yeah, nothing big in local option sales taxes. Like we were kind of expecting maybe something a little bit more apparent, and we don't. And in fact, we're seeing some pretty good trends. And this actually is supported by academic research. There's a lot of academic research that's been done in other states where we're seeing similar trends. And in fact, the rise of e-commerce seems to be benefiting rural areas more than our more urban metropolitan areas. And in fact, it's kind of decentralizing the decades of consolidation of economic centers. So it's a little bit of a different thing. It's different than a Walmart effect in that way, moving forward. So maybe this isn't important to you guys. This was really important for legislators to understand, and we'll go through it. If you have questions, let me know, but I'll kind of burn through it a little bit. But so why are there no negative impacts to local option sales taxes? Why aren't we seeing anything? Well, it comes down to two main questions. If we're talking about e-commerce, we need to figure out, one, who collects and remits the sales taxes? Because before, you know, if there's a use tax. So if somebody bought something and used it in Minnesota, but bought it from a different state, you were supposed to do, the consumer was meant to do the sales use tax, right? And that, you know, I think they did research on that. It was like 0.25% of people actually submit a sales use tax. Like no one does it, right? And then there's a second part about what sales tax should be charged, because there's varying sales taxes across Minnesota. So these are the two main questions that need to be answered with e-commerce. Supreme Court totally figured out who's collecting sales taxes, but it took them a long time. So before 2018, the rule was that a firm had to have a physical presence in the state in order for Minnesota to tell them, hey, you need to charge a sales tax, you need to collect that sales tax, and then you need to remit it to us. Before 2018, no state could do that if they did not have a physical presence in Minnesota. And then the Supreme Court finally kind of woke up and said, oh, wait, you know what, this physical presence thing may not be enough. They asked Congress back in the early 2010s to figure this out, and Congress didn't do anything with it. And so finally, the Supreme Court stepped in and said, all right, instead of a physical presence, we're going to have an economic nexus. And it was actually led by South Dakota, interestingly. South Dakota does not have a state income tax. So they take their sales taxes very seriously because that's one of their main sources of revenue. And so they were actually the ones to pass the first main law they started submitting to Wayfair and Amazon saying, hey, you need to pay us a sales tax based on who you're selling to in South Dakota. So Wayfair said, no way, took them to court, went to the Supreme Court. And South Dakota won. Finally, the Supreme Court said, yep, okay, this makes sense. We need to level the playing field. If people in the state have to, charge and remit a sales tax, so should the firms that aren't in the state but are doing having customers in the state. So the rule is if a firm has a total of 200 retail sales shipped to Minnesota and or more than $100,000 in retail sales shipped to Minnesota, then that firm, Minnesota Department of Revenue, will step in and say, hey, you need to charge, you need to remit. And so that's how that worked. And so now we need to answer this question about what sales tax gets charged. And the Minnesota Department of Revenue has done a great job at figuring this out. And as you all know, probably total sales tax rate in Minnesota can range from 6.875 to 8.875%, depending on where we're at, because Minnesota has a 6.875% sales tax. The counties can charge up to a 0.25 to a 0.5% sales tax, and then cities can go from 0.5 to 1% if they want to implement a local option sales tax. So the Minnesota Department of Revenue came up with 3 questions for the sales taxes. So first, is the product that's being purchased, should a sales tax be applied, which actually gets kind of interesting. We'll get into that in a bit here. The second one, this was the big one with e-commerce, is where did the customer receive the taxable product or service? That's the big question that needs to be answered. And then that third question is, once we determine number 2, number 3 is, does that nexus jurisdiction then have a local sales tax in place? So
oh, we lost your audio for a second, Kelly. Maybe try muting and unmuting again. You were on such a roll too. Oh, it sounds fine to Andrea.
I can hear it.
All right.
I can hear him.
Yeah, I can hear him really well.
Maybe it was just a problem on my end. All right, go ahead, Kelly. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, it sounds like some could hear us. My apologies. Yeah, all right. Well, so going to general sourcing rules here. So this is to answer that second question of where. And so we actually just go down the list. And so first, a firm has to say, all right, do we have the seller's address? When the purchaser picks up the product at the seller's location, charge tax based on the business location. Doesn't apply to e-commerce, or it does, but in a different way, right? So we'll get to that. The second piece is, let's say it's being shipped. Then the delivery address is what we use as the nexus jurisdiction of the tax to be charged. If we don't have that, then the third is the billing address. So do we charge tax based on the customer address in the records? If we don't have then 4, we charge tax based on the customer's address obtained during the transaction, maybe a customer's check or something like that. And then when we don't have that, then it's just wherever the firm is located. And that's like a very, very, very tiny, minuscule percent of all transactions. So what this means, kind of like in a more like comprehensive set, I put a kind of description of transactions to kind of figure out what that looks like on the ground. So like, let's say somebody purchases a product online, but sending it to a friend's house. The tax that gets charged is actually the location of the friend's house. So it had nothing to do with the buyer. It had nothing to do with the seller. It actually had to do with the person receiving the package. Another one, let's say this was a big thing in Candy, Ojai County. We have a local option sales tax, but Renville County, just to the south of us, doesn't. And let's say somebody's sitting in Olivia in Renville County. purchases something on Walmart.com and then drives to Wilmer to pick it up, which tax gets charged? It's actually the Candy, Ohio Wilmer tax gets charged. So even though you bought it online, sitting in Olivia, the tax that gets charged is where you're going to pick it up. Another interesting one, I bring this up because it's going to be a discussion in the future, which is digital photos and drawings. Right now, that product is exempt from sales tax. So if you print out a photo and send it to somebody, then a sales tax is charged, but not for digital photos and drawings. This is kind of one of those weird gray areas right now where we're all trying to figure out, what does this all mean? I'll provide another example. If you subscribe to Spotify, a sales tax is charged. But if I purchase like cloud space where I can store my music, there's no sales tax charged. And so there's some gray areas now that I put it in here because it's going to, at the legislature, they're going to be talking about this more and more because it's becoming a larger chunk of total sales. And it's a non-taxable sale, those kind of services. Is this a service or is this a product? That's where things get a little gray. And then I put in here purchasing an ebook just because I was in Utah on vacation and I actually bought an ebook while I was sitting in Utah and read it there, but I actually get charged a sales tax for as if I was in New London. Yeah, so there's a lot of weirdness behind it, but it's all laid out at the Minnesota Department of Revenue and they make it super easy for firms to figure it out. So yeah, so in the end, the reason local option sales taxes isn't seeing huge kind of repercussions so far is because not much has changed. The only thing that's changed here is the resident outside of the community that orders a product online and gets it delivered to their home. That's the one customer where it's changing. But what's interesting, so somebody in Wilmer might say, well, we're an economic center, we're losing those people. But the interesting thing is you're also gaining the people in your community sitting behind a computer, getting stuff delivered to their shop. So it may hurt the brick and mortar retailers, they're gonna have to change, but the actual local option sales tax revenues aren't changing because you're essentially swapping out customers and you're getting the same amount of revenue. So that's so far what's going, but this is still early in the ball game and things could change in a hurry. So the last section is just talking about impact on property taxes. And this is where things get a little bit, I don't want to say dicey, but it's different, it's tough. I put in here, so I did include Wadena County in these numbers here. So this is a change in number of retail firms since 2004. And as you can see, the entire state of Minnesota has been in decline in the number of retail. This is an ongoing trend. This has been happening since probably the 90s, late 2000s. There's a gradual decline, most significantly in our most rural areas of the state where they've seen, nearly 20 to 25% decline in retail since 2010. Wadena here is right at 17% decline since 2010. Actually, not too bad considering the rest of the state is doing just fine. Or not, I shouldn't say just fine, but better. So one thing that's interesting, sorry, this is kind of a crazy couple charts here, but what we typically see is a decline in retail firms, but we see, particularly in metropolitan areas, a big increase in non-retail firms. And so those will kind of balance each other out. So like in our real urban areas, they'll actually have an increase in the number of total firms. So both non-retail and retail of about 11% because they had a 26% increase in non-retail. Sorry, this is change in number of firms. I should say change in number of non-retail firms. My fault, folks. So this is non-retail here, this is total firms here, and they balance out, but it doesn't so much in our rural areas where they've only seen a 1.5% increase in non-retail firms. So they still saw a decline in overall firms. And Wadena actually is really seen some decline. So a 10%, 11% decline in non-retail firms and a 13% decline overall in total firms since 2004. So you would think this would equal like not good things regarding property tax revenues, but that has not been the case. So this has been a little bit weird, I think, for legislators like, wait, now I'm seeing less businesses, less firms. How is it possible that property taxes are going up? And as you can see, like our rural areas in particular, where the biggest declines are, for some, we'll talk about it here, for whatever reason, they're seeing some of the largest increases in property tax revenues. And Wadena is right around, they've doubled since 2005 in total county property taxes collected. And the reason is, another crazy chart, is because the type of properties, different types of properties are seeing huge increases in their values. So these bubbles, so we got entirely rural counties, rural counties. These are kind of like that spectrum of our most rural and our most urban, and there's everything in between. And then I got Wadena on the end here. Each dot bubble represents a property type. I have them listed here. The size of the bubble is the change of property tax since 2005. And then this y-axis is what percentage of the total property taxes that sector makes up. And so, for example, this red bubble for entirely rural is ag and forest land. And as you can see, it's increased by about 150 to 200% in value or in property taxes paid since 2005. So right now, as of 2019, it makes up nearly 50% of total property taxes paid. This is, and then you'll notice commercial, which is getting into that retail and that kind of firm industry, even though they've seen significant declines, they just don't make up a huge portion of the pie. And so even though we see these big declines in those number of firms, it's so far not having a significant impact. It maybe would if ag land and some of these other property types didn't see such big increases in values, then we would feel the pinch a little bit. But since they've seen such huge increases, it's just not equaling out, or it's not really, yeah, making it work. So I did include Wadena here, and I apologize, this big bubble here, that's actually utility, rail, and mineral properties seeing huge increases. But I pulled up, I have the spreadsheet over here. So utility, rail, and mineral properties only makes up about 5% of total property taxes, but it's seen growth of 256%. That's why the bubble is so big. So let me pull up retail here, or commercial properties. So commercial properties in Wadena actually is makes up about 13% of total property taxes. That's significant. That's right in line with entirely urban and our urban town rural mix. You guys have a property type mix that's very similar to those rather than entirely rural and town rural. And so, yeah, it was 13%, and it's increased property taxes since 56% in property taxes. So one thing you might be wondering is if there's a decline in retail or commercial in general, so Wadena in general has a 13% decline in the number of firms, how can property values go up? Obviously, it's not a good economy. But what you're seeing is, and you see this in retail, is that even though there's less retailers, for the most part, and this is global, nationwide, the profits they're making are higher. So even though there's less properties or less firms, those firms are very successful or more profitable than ever. And so that's why property values increase, because the way they assessors calculate commercial property values includes kind of income and other types of variables. That means that they would, and how much they're selling for. So even though there's less firms, those properties still sell for really high. So that's that. I know it's a lot, but oh yeah, things to keep an eye on. It was really minimal right now because we're so early in the game. But one, we need to find ways to better categorize e-commerce. That was kind of for the Department of Revenue to consider. Like, this isn't going away. This trend is going to get more and more aggressive. And so we need to keep an eye on it. So we need a little bit better data. And then the second thing, and this is tied to the next report we're releasing, which is that county reliance on ag land values in particular, but it's keeping an eye on property tax shifts. Like, property taxes are kind of getting shifted around, and some are paying more than others. You definitely see it during school referendums and farmers and ag land, where they're just like, hey, you want a referendum, but a dozen farmers are paying 30% of the referendum. So things like that are going to continue to arise as we kind of see these things flux a little bit. So with that, I will stop sharing. Sorry I didn't keep track of the chat. There might be more stuff going on here.
There weren't,
Okay.
I didn't see any questions in the chat, but Kelly, thank you so much for a lot of information. But I like that it wasn't all bad news for rural areas. I feel like we kind of get used to, oh, there's going to be a presentation on rural. Buckle up for the bad news, everybody. And that's not the case. So this is very refreshing. I'm interested to hear what questions do people have. Feel free to unmute yourself or pop it into the chat. questions for Kelly? Mayor Dice, you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I actually don't have a question. I was just gonna comment on what Kelly was talking about, local area sales tax. We actually have one that is going to go on to our November ballot. And to fund the remainder of the cost for our library remodel. But they actually allowed us to go at 0.125%. Because we had so much that was already donated, we were allowed to go at a smaller percentage, so it would have less of an impact.
That's great. Yeah, yeah, fabulous. Yeah, and good luck on the November, you know, always it always works. I know in New London we always talked about, well, we're tax importers. So you're not all paying the tax, it's people that don't live here, right? Like that works pretty good.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for bringing that up. Melissa Wyman from Staples, I have a question for you. Is Staples considering having a local sales tax on the ballot? Did I read that in the Staples world?
Yep, you did. We are putting that forth in November as well. That would be actually for remodels and maintenance of the community center. And that way, all the users of the community center tend to come to Staples and do a lot of their shopping. We're not able to tax those outside jurisdictions, so we figured this would be a great way to be able to improve and maintain that facility.
Yep,
Thanks,
good luck.
Thanks for sharing that, Melissa. And that's a great idea. People come in, go to the community center, might stop by Los Corrales, get some takeout on the way home to Pillager or wherever they're coming from. So
Stop and get some groceries and
stop
all of
and
the
get
different.
some groceries. Yeah, spend that money in our local communities.
Yes.
Any other questions for Kelly or comments? Feel free to unmute. Going once.
I guess I would just say, Kelly, extremely interesting information. I didn't even know how curious I was, but I was almost as excited as you were when you were presenting it, listening to you. So good presentation, great information. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think as a New London City Council member, it was on the top of our mind too. Is like, okay, pandemic hit, like, and we're pretty touristy here with all the boutiques, but man, things just keep rolling. So
So it sounds from what's coming in the chat and from what Melissa says, sounds like we're all jazzed about this presentation. Dean, did you unmute yourself for a comment?
Yes, I was just going to say the same thing that Melissa said. Really interesting information, very informative presentation, Kelly. Appreciate it. Some very eye-opening statistics. So thank you.
yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Last call for comments or questions. Looking at all your little red mute buttons here. No one seems to be unmuting. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to do our local updates now, so you can hop off if you got somewhere to go, but thank you for joining us.
You bet, and pleasure, and feel free to reach out if you want other presentations of our research. We're happy to help. So
thank you, Kelly. All right, well, let's keep moving along. David Heyer from Deed, you knew you were going to be up next. What do you have for us today?
Good morning, everybody. Not a lot of updates from the state's perspective. We're waiting, of course, for the budget numbers, and the end of February we'll bring out the February numbers should be out. We should have those and determine what we're doing. The governor has proposed another couple new programs, but I think for this group, I don't know if getting into those details yet would be advantageous. It's all a blur right now until they come up with the final numbers and final budgets on what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. So I think it's better to wait to see how this all shakes out rather than trying to push a bunch of potentially new programs that may or may not get passed. So there are a couple updates to the commissioner. We are going to be with the commissioner in Fergus Falls this Wednesday. And then Thursday, we're up in the Moorhead Fargo area for an economic development summit from the folks in North Dakota. So we're going to be attending that. So the commission will be through that area, West Central region, touring, getting a little bit of tours for small businesses. So that's really it from the state's perspective. Thanks, Katie. And that was a great presentation by Kelly. I missed the first part of it, unfortunately, but what I caught of it was very interesting.
Definitely. Any questions for David? Feel free to unmute yourself. All right,
Yep.
thanks for joining us. Happy
No,
to
Dean's
hear
got
that.
a question. Dean's
Oh,
got a
Dean, do you have
question.
a question or are you getting ready to
Yeah.
go?
No, I just,
Oh, go
I
ahead.
was going to let Dave know, we talked a little bit about potentially trying to develop or include additional residential funding for or funding for residential projects through the BDPI or another program, maybe a standalone program. And just you had mentioned coming to that summit, and I will not be able to be there on Thursday, but anything you can do to bring this to the forefront with Indeed or to the commissioner would be appreciated. I think it would be a real advantage to be able to put together that program with the current budget surplus that we have. So just heads up on that. I will not be able to be there on Thursday, but
We'll miss you. Sorry about that. But
that's fine.
I'll champion your idea up to my
Great.
boss and Kevin to see how that goes.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Any other questions or comments deed related? All right, well, thank you for joining us. Appreciate you being here. Dean.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Terrific presentation and very informative. A lot of things happening in Wadena. I mentioned to Dave, the housing project that we've got going on, we're closing on that next week on the purchase of that property and putting together funding for the infrastructure, streets, and getting that ready for construction next year. But had a number of good conversations with some new clients, commercial clients, late last week and early this week. So some additional things I can't elaborate too much right now, but there's just a lot of things happening. Really good things. And the mayor alluded to the fact that we're going to be promoting a sales tax initiative on our ballot this fall. So we're hoping to promote that and get that done. Since the last coffee talk, I think that's about what I have, unless someone has questions for me.
Thanks, Dean. I have a quick question. How
Yeah.
are you guys doing in your search for an administrator? Where are you guys at in the process?
A week from today, we're doing interviews, I guess. Yeah. And I don't know if the mayor wants to discuss that further, but I feel like that's the information that I can provide.
Mayor Dice, anything to expand on that?
We are down to 3 applicants. We did our original interview of 9 and reduced it down to 6, and they were all excited about coming and stuff. And then 2 days later, 2 of them dropped off the list. And a few days after that, another one dropped off the list. So we're down to 3. April 4th is when they're coming to town for their face-to-face interviews. Still some very strong candidates, so we're excited about that. One thing I need to add, what Dean was talking about, promoting the sales tax. So the city is not promoting it. That's illegal. We cannot promote the sales tax. The Friends of the Library can, and they will be the ones doing the promoting. All we can do is show the numbers, how much the sales tax would save you on a, say, $100,000 home. what your levy would be as opposed to a sales tax, which as was alluded to in the presentation, anyone who comes into town and spends money helps to fund the project. So anyways, and one other thing, I guess, because I probably won't do I won't jump back on anytime because I actually am meeting with Representative Fishbaugh Zaid in about 5 minutes. And is that there is some parking now downtown. People have noticed 2-hour parking signs and they're like, oh no, oh no. As with a lot of our city ordinances, it is a complaint based. So if somebody camps their car out all day long, the police department might get a call and say, this car hasn't moved. They will investigate that complaint. If somebody is coming into town and is saying, well, I can't go to a movie at the theater because they're going to ticket me. No, that's not going to happen. So just so people are aware of that also. So
Thanks for sharing that little piece about the parking. Good to know you don't have a bunch of, I don't know if the term anymore is meter maid, but out on the loose.
yeah, our police force is busy enough to where they don't need to be patrolling the streets day in and day out looking for somebody who's been sitting there 2 hours and 15 minutes. So anyways, that's all I have. I'll let you go back to Dean.
Thanks.
Well, I just want to say thanks for clarification on that, Mayor. I don't want to get anybody in jail, but yeah, so the city can't promote it, but we're hoping that it passes. Maybe that's a better way to say it.
Yeah.
Oh,
And perhaps a future coffee talk subject might be presentations on both the Wadena and the Staples initiatives to hear more about that. All right, any further comments, Dean, or any questions for him? All right,
thank you, everyone.
moving along. Melissa, what's new in Staples besides local sales tax options for the community center?
And well, along with that, we're also looking at other granting agencies and formats to be able to get that expanded and revitalized. So hopefully good things are coming for our community center. As far as Parks and Recs go, we do have 2 parks playground systems going in here as soon as the shipping comes through. We're thinking maybe June is kind of the hope. We were hoping before that, but there'll be a playground going out to Dower Lake and a playground going to Lincoln Park on the south side of town. So good information for people to be able to know that they can enjoy that. As far as economic development goes, we do have some housing projects in the work in our Valley View development area with a twin home developer that is interested in doing 6 pads, 12 homes, 12 sides, I guess, 12 doors. And then 2 developers interested in doing single family to fill those 7 to 8, depending if they want to keep that extra one over on the corner, single family home or not. But they're all looking, it looks like everybody is, will be able to get those filled between the next couple of years here. So some of those, it would be 4 single family homes for sure this summer is the plan, assuming that the sale goes through. Voyager is expanding already. And so they are currently at about 30 people since they opened their doors and cleaned the place up and really started hiring people in February. So it's really impressive. They're really happy with the workforce and the applications that they've received. So thank you to the counties and the people within those counties for, showing them how great of a place it is to do business in Wadena and Staples, Wadena County and Staples. So Voyager is expanding. They're renting a space at the industrial building starting April. So really quick turnaround there. And then with that, Accurate Tooling is also looking at additional space within the industrial buildings. We'll have all those units filled, which would be great. In addition, Lakewood has people, I'm sure I've mentioned it before, the Highway 10 lot. Lakewood was selected for that. They put together a site plan or a preliminary site plan. It actually sounds like they may be adding a 3rd floor to the 2-story building. This will house the TCO facilities for orthopedics. And then in addition, there's 3 commercial spaces available for rent along with a drive-through area. So whether there's a coffee shop or some other restaurant that would like a drive-through, and then housing up on the 2nd and potentially possibly a 3rd floor. So really exciting things. Lots of dirt will be moving, and that's what we like to see. Cardinal Pines is almost completed with their 2nd phase. And so it sounds like they're getting ready to start leasing those out if they're not already done. I think that's what I have that kind of pertains to this group in Wadena County.
Thank you so much, Melissa. So great to hear stuff moving, on the manufacturing front, on the housing front, all things we like to hear and like to see. I also really like that Lakewood included like a drive-through option, because that's such a needed thing. And, especially I think we all
On Highway 10.
Yeah, right on Highway 10. And we kind of learned through COVID that having dine-in and takeout and like easy access, no touch transfer, that's a trend. That's hot. Probably ain't going anywhere. So cool to see they included that.
I should also mention this summer, I believe if they start this summer, there's a few holdups. The school district is doing an expansion. There is a partnership there. And so there'll be some construction and road work and additional building and gym space at the school district going on. So I don't want to leave their project out either.
So things are happening in Staples. Love it. Any questions for Melissa? All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Joel, do you have an update to share with us today?
Good morning, everybody. Touch real briefly on COVID. The good news is we are in a much better place than we were several weeks ago. We're seeing the community prevalence, the positivity rates are now very manageable. From a tri-county impact standpoint, really most things are back to normal. As much normal as they can be based on other rules being instituted to us by Minnesota Department of Health or CDC. The state hospital capacity is also in a state that is much improved. I wouldn't say quite back to normal because there's still 250 to 300 beds occupied by COVID patients. So there's still some challenges. And of course, the workforce challenges married to that, it's still a little tenuous if we see an uptick. And of course, we're all now keeping our eye on the new BA2, I think it is, the variants. Some have used the term stealth variants on this one. It's predominantly over in Europe, but there is some activity in it here in the US, as well as I saw an article just last week from the Star Tribune that it is prevalent in the wastewater analysis that's happening down in the Twin Cities. So, but we'll keep our eye on it and hopefully believe that COVID is something that we can manage like other disease categories, but we'll see what, we won't determine that, the disease will, of course. So that's all I've got in that. I will talk briefly on what will be the future Astera Health campus, our building project. So lots happening. We are almost right halfway through our construction. We're about 9 months in and 9 months to go with the project. Things are moving very rapidly out there. They are approximately 1/3 done with the wall installation around the campus. So things are expected to be completed at the end of this year. I think what the public will see is a lot of activity starting again in the spring on the outside of the facility. So our site work, this is where the interagency collaboration is going to transition from planning to the actual work. So the city utility project, which will impact coming down Greenwood Avenue, coordinating with the county on the Greenwood Avenue. There was a pretty well attended county public hearing that Darren Feldbaum, the county engineer, held last week to answer questions for the residents out there. And then there'll be impacts on 11th Street as well as the Highway 10 intersection between MnDOT and the county managing the road projects, working with the city on utility projects. We're going to see a lot happening, a lot of disruptions. So there'll be most of those communications in terms of street closures, those sorts of things is all going to be coming from the city and or county associated with that, and most of it county. But we will see a lot happening. And right now our planned move-in date and first go live date is March 24th, 2023. So we're just over a year away. That's what I've got today, Katie.
Thanks, Joel, for that. Excited that you have a move-in date on the calendar. What a cool thing. Any questions for him? All right, I'll open up the floor for the last few minutes. Does anyone have any updates they'd like to share with the group? Feel free to unmute yourself. All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us on this Monday morning. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. Take care.